bride of King James IV. But Boleyn had no official appointment at court and, in the early years of his marriage before Anne was born, only £50 a year with which to clothe himself in the customary velvets, satins and jewels, and to provide for his house in the country, his family and his servants. With the provisions from the home farm as well as the game from the park, without which no large Tudor residence was viable, the Boleyn household made ends meet, although Elizabeth was almost embarrassingly fruitful. "She brought me every year a child," Boleyn was to write years later in shuddering reminiscence, for the memory of that genteel poverty was to haunt him all his life. Infant mortality was at the time, however, high, and two of these children, who so strained Boleyn's slender financial resources, Henry and Thomas, died early, to be commemorated by two small brass crosses, which can still be seen on the stone floors of the neighbouring churches of Hever and of Penshurst. 3 children survived: George, born about 1503, Mary about 1504, and Anne, the youngest. Hard up though they were when first married, fortunately for the Boleyns, they were also related to 2 powerful families, both of which claimed descent from King Edward I. Through her mother Elizabeth, Anne was granddaughter of the Earl of Surrey, High Treasurer of England, who was to become, in 1514, Duke of Norfolk, head of the Howards. Though temporarily also short of money through having found themselves on the Plantagenet side at the end of the Wars of the Roses, the Howards had soon regained their influence at court. Through her father, Anne was the great-granddaughter of the rich Earl of Ormond, possessor of the major areas of Tipperary and Kilkenny, as well as 72 manors in England. Ormond would live until 1515, but his son-in-law William was less lucky. He died in 1505, leaving Thomas Boleyn 8 manors. So by Anne's birth date, 2 years later, the shadow of genteel poverty had already lifted from the stone towers and raftered rooms of Hever Castle. And by the time Anne was toddling about the rush-strewn floors of her nursery and reaching up to the scented herbs on the window-sills, Thomas's career had taken a dramatic step forward too. The ageing King Henry VII had appointed him to that much-coveted position among the lesser courtiers, Esquire to the Body, a position which had the clear advantage of giving access to the monarch in days when he was the chief source of wealth and power, of preferment and perquisites. Thomas Boleyn, as one of Henry's 6 esquires, slept on a pallet within call, personally dressed the king in the royal bedchamber, with garments handed to him on the threshold by a groom who was forbidden to enter, and who, in his turn, had received the sacred garment from the yeoman of the wardrobe at the door of the privy chamber. When in 1509 the old King Henry VII died, to be replaced by his athletic 17-year-old son as Henry VIII, Boleyn, at the age of 32, somehow hung on to his position in the royal household. Its new master, who before Prince Arthur's death had been intended for the church and spent his childhood secluded from the world, lived in apartments whose only door opened out of his father's rooms, forbidden to speak to any but specially selected people, and allowed to walk only in the royal park, now emerged from this cocoon-like existence into the sudden brilliance and freedom of life as a king. He was suggestible and easily flattered. Boleyn made profitable use of these failings in the monarch's character. The young Henry, reacting against his upbringing, ushered in his spectacular reign by executing his father's 2 tax collectors, Empson and Dudley, then squandering the carefully hoarded money. He turned the sober court of his parsimonious father